My business trip ended a day earlier, and I rushed to catch a flight that very afternoon. But the moment I got off the plane, I froze when I saw my husband holding a bouquet of white tulips, embracing and kissing another woman. Not me. I walked up and confronted them right then and there. But instead of apologizing, my husband shouted, "I've loved her since before I married you." I am Melissa Vance, 35 years old, an architect at Meridian Design Group in Seattle, Washington. After 3 exhausting days on a business trip to Denver, I was relieved when it ended a day earlier than scheduled. I dragged my suitcase into the arrivals terminal of Seattle-Tacoma Airport and opened the Uber app to call a ride home. Everything seemed ordinary until I saw him. Amid the throng of travelers, Jaden Vance, my husband, CEO of the veterinary pharmaceutical company Biovitis, stood in the greeting area holding a bouquet of white tulips and a sign written in black ink. "Welcome home, Nivae." My heart dropped. In that instant, the noise of the airport faded, and all I could hear was the rolling of my suitcase wheels across the cold tiled floor. Then she appeared, Neve Brooks, Biovetis's CFO and my closest friend. She smiled brightly, hurried toward Jaden. He opened his arms, embraced her tightly, and kissed her on the lips in the middle of the crowd. I stood frozen. There was no room for doubt, no explanation left. I placed my suitcase down, walked straight toward them, and said in a disturbingly calm voice, "Perhaps you both forgot that I just flew back to Seattle too." Jaden jumped, his face going pale. What are you doing here?" Neve turned around, her eyes red but unwavering. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. "This is real love, Melissa. Jaden loved me before he ever married you." It felt like time had stopped. No announcements, no footsteps, just the three of us and a truth flung straight at my face. I looked straight at Jaden. "Before marrying me? So I was just a cover all these years?" He looked away, his voice dropping, cold and merciless. "I've faked it long enough, Mel." It's time things returned to where they belong. That line was like a blade, slicing through everything I believed was real. I bent down, picked up my suitcase, tears streaming, but my voice remained even. "I hope to see you soon, in court." I turned and walked out of the terminal, the neon lights reflecting off the icy floor behind me. Jaden and Neve remained still, not hiding, not remorseful, just silent, watching me walk away as if shedding a weight. For me, every step was a wound, sharp, painful, but also the beginning of a truth they never expected. 2 weeks later, I received an email from work. Personnel restructuring, termination of contract, signed by Marcus, Jaden's best friend. I sat alone in my empty apartment, read that line 10 times, then laughed. Neat. Lost my husband, lost my job, all in 2 weeks. But it didn't stop there. A letter from a law firm came. Divorce papers. Jaden accused me of being mentally unstable and financially incompetent. At the bottom was the signature of the man who once swore to protect me forever. My phone buzzed. Neve's message, "You're as stupid as your mother." Leave with nothing, I slammed the phone on the table. The lakeside house in Bellevue, once filled with laughter, was now just 4 walls and shattered memories. I packed a few clothes, my old laptop, and the last of the cash I had. That day, the bank notified me that our joint account had been transferred under Jaden's name, all my credit cards frozen. My old Lexus had been repossessed. Jaden's name was on the loan. He had done all this in a single morning. Clean, cold, like the way he signed the divorce papers. The rain began. Seattle rain is nothing new, but that night it felt like the sky wanted to drown the whole city. I pulled my thin coat tighter and walked the sidewalks, each step heavy as if I were walking over the ruins of my own life. Rain soaked my collar, chilling my spine. No one stopped. No one asked where I was going in the middle of the night. I walked on, not knowing what I was looking for, only that if I stopped, I'd collapse. The rain poured, and streetlights blurred into smears of dull gold on wet pavement. I walked until my legs numbed, my coat clung to my body, the cold wind cutting through. And then, through the curtain of rain, I saw a rusted, leaning sign, glowing weakly. Motel Crossroads. Below it, almost faded. Vacancy, room available. I stopped, gasping, rain mingling with tears I could no longer distinguish. I stepped into the reception, hands shaking as I signed for a room with my last bit of cash. Room 13, the cheapest, and therefore the worst. The room was small, low-ceilinged, smelling of mildew and peeling paint. I set down my soaked suitcase, sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the rain pound the metal roof like a heartbeat. Dim yellow light flickered on the mirror, reflecting a woman with nothing left to lose. That night, beneath Seattle's endless rain, I didn't know what lay ahead. All I knew was I had just walked out of a marriage that left me nearly penniless. Every friend I called ignored me, unaware of what I wanted to say. I had fallen from middle-class stability into rock bottom in under 2 months. Before going on, I want to thank you for being here and sharing this journey with me. If you believe that truth and resilience matter, please consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps these stories reach those who need hope. Now, let's see what happens next. I was lying on the squeaky bed, staring at the ceiling, eyes wide open in the middle of the night. Sleeplessness had become routine. As I reached down to pick up a pen from the floor, my fingers touched something cold and hard beneath the bed. I pulled it out, a brown leather suitcase so worn that the edges had cracked and peeled. Under the dim yellow light, I saw faint lettering engraved on the lid's corner. Melissa V. I froze. I had never seen or owned this item before. Who would leave a suitcase bearing my name in this cheap motel room? My heart pounded. I placed it on the bed, tried random number combinations on the lock. None worked. Then, inexplicably, I typed in my birth date, 0714. A dry click rang out, like the sound of a door opening to something long buried. I lifted the lid. The scent of old leather and damp paper spilled out, pungent, familiar in an uncanny way. Inside were 3 neatly arranged items: a thick stack of cash, later counted to be around $70,000, a round-trip plane ticket to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and a neatly folded handwritten letter, sealed with red wax. On the corner of the envelope was unmistakable handwriting, softly slanted, unmistakably that of Aunt Helen Vance, the only person in my family who ever believed in me, and who had died 9 months ago. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Melissa, if you're reading this, it means Jaden and Nevis have shown their true selves. Do not trust them. Your mother, Catherine, was murdered. It wasn't an accident. Go to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Finish what Catherine started. The truth will save you if you dare to face it. I read it again, and again. Each word cut deeper than the last. Your mother was murdered. That line echoed in my mind like a hammer strike. I sat motionless, the dark room pressing in around me. No fan noise, no human presence, just the rush of my blood in my ears. Inside the suitcase was also an old photograph. I picked it up. My mother, Catherine Vance, smiling on stage at a Meridian Pharmaceuticals conference. In the photo's corner, reflected in a glass panel behind her, was the figure of a tall man. Broad shoulders, a stance chillingly familiar. Jaden. The photo slipped from my fingers. I gripped the edge of the bed to steady myself. My whole body trembled, breath unsteady. I looked at the suitcase, still open, the yellow light glinting off the money, and the plane ticket. One thought pounded through my skull. If the letter was true, then I hadn't just lost a marriage. I had lived beside the man who killed my mother. I sat there for what felt like forever, under the flickering light, the world collapsing in silence. And in that moment, I knew. Tonight, my life had entered a new chapter. I would uncover the truth. The next morning, I removed my wedding ring and stared at the cold glint of gold against my sleepless, pale skin. It had once symbolized a vow. Now, it only made me nauseous. I brought it to a small pawn shop near the bus station and exchanged it for a few $100s, just enough to buy a plane ticket and the cheapest breakfast of the day. I swore not to touch the cash in the suitcase unless absolutely necessary. If Helen had left it for me, She must have known I'd need it when every other door was slammed shut. The flight to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, departed at 6 a.m. I sat by the window, watching Seattle shrink into a thick gray mist. My mind was in knots, fear tangled with an eerie clarity. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. One wrong step and everything would collapse. But if I didn't move forward, I'd stay forever trapped in the darkness cast by Jaden and Nava. The plane landed at a small airport blanketed in snow. When the door opened, a wave of mountain-cold air slapped my face, and I shivered. No one here knew me, and that, more than anything, let me breathe. I rented an old Ford pickup with a cracked dashboard, split leather seats, and a grumbling but reliable engine. I drove along winding roads flanked by pine trees, snow covering everything, the sun flickering over the distant Tetons. The map in Helen's letter led me to the cabin where she once lived, nestled deep in the forest, its front door sealed with yellow caution tape. I stepped out, inhaled deeply, and walked through the snow, every footstep crunching through the icy ground. When I pried open the door, dust billowed out, and the scent of damp wood and old tea filled the air. Inside, everything looked as if it had been abandoned mid-sentence. A teacup half full on the table, a sweater draped over a chair, a journal left open. No sign that anyone had returned since. I walked slowly through the house, fingertips grazing familiar objects from my memory. Helen used to knit scarves in that corner, laughing as she told me, "Truth never lives on the surface. You have to bend down to see it." That sentence flashed through my mind. I knelt, scanning the living room rug. One edge was slightly raised, as if someone had pried it up before. I tugged. It gave way to reveal a small wooden trapdoor sealed tight. My heart pounded. I found a knife in the kitchen and began working along the edges. After a few minutes, the lid popped open, revealing an old wooden box sealed with wax. Inside, nestled among neatly folded papers, was a silver USB drive labeled in marker, Catherine_accident_files. I held it up, the dull light reflecting off its metal casing. My hands were freezing, but something flickered inside me, either hope or a fear far greater. Whatever it was, I knew I was on the edge of a truth my mother had died to protect. I plugged the silver USB into my laptop. The screen flickered a few times before revealing a single folder. Meridian Conference, 8 years ago. My hand shook as I opened the first file. The video began with a grainy view of a large conference hall. Hundreds of people in suits filled the seats, light glinting off a sign that read, "Meridian Pharmaceuticals, Annual Research Summit." The sound was fuzzy, the footage slightly shaky, clearly recorded covertly, probably from an old phone. Then the camera panned to the stage. My mother, Catherine Vance, in a pale gray dress, arguing heatedly with a man in a black suit. My heart nearly stopped when I recognized his posture, his eyes and voice. "Jaden, Catherine, if you keep covering up the VTX-09 trials, you'll be responsible for the deaths of thousands of animals. Jaden, Catherine, don't blow this out of proportion. This project has millions invested. You can't just—" Catherine, cutting in, voice breaking. "If you keep hiding this, I'll release everything to the public." Right after her words, the video erupted in static. The frame jolted, and then went completely dark. I tried rewinding, but the file froze right at the moment my mother turned and exited the frame. I stared at the black screen. Outside, Wyoming wind howled against the cabin's wooden walls. My throat tightened. Tears slipped out before I could stop them. "So she knew," I whispered. "She knew their secret. And she died for it." I wiped my tears and opened the remaining documents in the folder. A PDF titled Invoices_2016 appeared. I scanned through hundreds of seemingly irrelevant entries until one line chilled my blood. "Rental truck, Seattle, December 4th, 2016, signed, J. Vance." I zoomed in on the signature. The slanted, sharp handwriting. I had seen it hundreds of times before. House deeds, our marriage certificate, charity invoices. Unmistakable. Jaden Vance. He rented a truck the exact day my mother had her accident. Everything around me felt like it was collapsing. I slammed the laptop shut, covered my face with my hands. My body trembled, shaking from rage and shame. For 6 years, I had trusted a man my mother tried to expose. I had shared a bed, meals, my life, with someone who may have killed my mother. I stood up and paced through Helen's cabin, every breath burning in my lungs. Every photo, every note, every memory here had become evidence in a murder. I returned to the table, stared at the dark screen, and felt something ignite deep inside me, a resolve like nothing I'd ever known. If my mother died to protect this secret, then I would live to reveal it. The next morning, I pulled on a thick sweater, slipped a cap over my head, and stepped outside into the biting cold. The Wyoming sky was a dense gray, snow coating the porch and the winding path leading down to the small settlement at the base of the hill. Helen once mentioned she had a trusted neighbor who helped care for her during her illness. The name surfaced in my memory: Evelyn Carter. I drove past silent cabins tucked between trees, stopping before a small one painted ivory. The door stood slightly ajar, and an elderly woman with snow-white hair rocked gently on a chair, feeding a cat. I stepped closer and softly called, "Mrs. Carter?" "I'm Melissa, Helen Vance's niece." She looked up, surprise flickering across her face before softening. "Good heavens. You look just like Helen when she was young." "I thought no one from the Vance family would ever come back here." I nodded, my voice tight. "I didn't think I would either, not unless it was because of what Helen left behind." Mrs. Carter was silent for a moment, then motioned for me to sit beside her on the wooden step. Wind whispered through the trees, branches creaking like secrets. She spoke slowly, each word slicing the air. "About a week before she passed, Helen came here late at night and said she was being watched. Someone kept parking along the main road, sitting in their car for hours. When I asked who it was, she just said, 'If I disappear, don't believe Catherine died in an accident.'" I clenched my hands on my knees, fighting to stay calm. "Do you know who was watching her?" She shook her head, voice trembling. "No. But Helen told me there was something she kept in the shed out back, somewhere only family would know about. She said, 'If Melissa ever comes, give her this.'" Evelyn rose and slowly disappeared inside. When she returned, she handed me a rusted keyring bound with a pale blue ribbon. She placed it in my hand. "Helen said only you had the right to open that shed. Be careful, Melissa. The truth is something people lose sleep over." I gripped the keys, thanked her, and drove back to Helen's cabin. In the backyard, half buried under snow, stood a shed with a dented metal roof. I had to dig with a shovel to clear the entrance. The lock was rusted, but one key fit perfectly. The door creaked open, releasing the scent of damp wood and motor oil. Inside was pitch black, light filtering in only through cracks. I switched on a flashlight. Boxes, old tools, and a rug stretched across the floor. One section bulged oddly beneath it. I pulled it away, revealing a square wooden panel carved with the initials H.V. Helen Vance. I slid a thin knife into the edge, pried at it, and after several minutes, it gave way, revealing a sealed wooden box. A paper label was taped to the lid, written in Helen's messy hand. "Meridian, Anonymous." I carried it out to the porch, brushed away thick dust, and broke the seal. Inside was a bundle of documents in a moisture-proof sleeve. The top sheet was a notarized share agreement from Meridian Pharmaceuticals, bearing the initials J.V., Jaden Vance. The date of signing, 2 weeks before our wedding. The air punched from my chest. I flipped to the next pages. Contracts verifying the anonymous transfer of 12% of the company's shares from an offshore account to Jaden. The origin of the transfer: Catherine Vance. I dropped the papers, my breath ragged. It all made sense. He had forged my mother's identity, stolen her shares, and married me to complete a long-planned scheme. My entire marriage, my entire career, had been the scaffolding for his empire. I looked around the dark shed, wind howling through the slats, a chill racing down my spine. But inside me, something was burning. Jaden Vance, I whispered, you built your kingdom on my mother's blood. Now I'll tear it down with my own hands. I closed the wooden box and sat for hours in silence amid the dust-filled air. The Wyoming wind still howled through the cracks in the walls, like a voice whispering at my ear. I opened Helen's journal, and among the hurried slanted lines, I found a passage that froze every nerve in my body. Neve once worked as Catherine's financial assistant, but after Catherine's death, Justine was appointed CEO, and within 3 months, Neve was promoted by Jaden to CFO of Meridian. It was no coincidence. It was the reward for betrayal. I set the notebook down, feeling the floor shift beneath me. Neve, the woman who once sat beside my mother in the accounting office, who sent me wedding cards and called me her little sister, had taken my mother's position right after her death. It wasn't a promotion. It was succession by design. I turned on my laptop and opened the old USB Helen left behind. Among dozens of technical files, one stood out, marked with a red symbol, VTX09 internal memo. I clicked it open. The words on the screen cut like a blade. If Catherine does not stay silent about VTX09, Moss and Jaden will handle it. The two names, Moss and Jaden, stood side by side, cold and final as a death sentence. My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms. My mother had uncovered veterinary drug fraud, proof that the VTX09 trials caused mass deaths in test animals, and instead of stopping it, they chose to silence the only one brave enough to speak. I shut my eyes, feeling fury boil in my veins. For years, I told myself that my mother's death was fate, that Jaden was just a volatile husband, that Nevaeh was merely weak, not wicked. But illusions no longer had space to live. I grabbed my notebook, flipped to the last page, and wrote with trembling but resolute strokes. If Helen died to protect this secret, I will live to expose it. I set down the pen and stared at the line, a strange mix of pain and clarity rising within me. From this moment on, I was no longer the betrayed wife. I was the last person left to end their circle of deceit. I reopened the lead-sealed box and dug into the bottom compartment, where a small velvet pouch was taped shut with a handwritten note. Audio, H and M. Inside was a mini cassette and a hastily scribbled slip of paper. Moss, Director of Research, Meridian. I connected the recorder to my laptop, heart pounding so hard it drowned the room. Static crackled, then a dry male voice emerged. Moss. Catherine found the falsified data. If she talks, we lose everything, Helen. You're playing with people's lives. Moss. You don't understand. Catherine will have an accident. That's the end of it. The room fell into suffocating darkness. My fingers went white from the grip on my knees. Every theory, every piece I had tried to rationalize as coincidence, disintegrated in an instant. I heard my own voice crack into a broken whisper. Mom, they really killed you. I forced myself to breathe, slipping into survival mode. There was no space for panic anymore. I backed up every piece of evidence, the conference video, the share contracts, the rental invoice, the recording, into 3 separate encrypted cloud servers across different regions, each locked with unique codes and 2-factor authentication tied to a spare phone and a new email. Every file carried its own identifier, its password known only to me. Once the security was in place, I opened my old contacts and stopped at a name I hadn't dialed in years. Cynthia Morgan, the attorney who once helped me draft my first project's confidentiality clause. I attached a read-only link to the Vance Truth folder and typed quickly, Cynthia, if I disappear, send everything to the FBI. This is evidence of Catherine's death and the VTX09 fraud. I watched the cursor blink a few times, then hit send. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled through the pines. In my head, Helen's words echoed, Don't fear the truth. I closed the laptop, wiped my tears with the back of my hand, and prepared for the next step, to call the only place powerful enough to make them pay. Night fell faster than I expected. While checking my final backups, the feed from an old security camera in the corner flickered, showing a dark figure moving across the yard. My pulse spiked. I zoomed in, and under the pale reflection of snow, a black SUV rolled up to the gate, engine humming before cutting off. Headlights dimmed. Through the static, I strained to read the license plate, and then a logo came into focus on the door decal. Biovetis. The chill inside me was worse than the cold outside. Helen had described that car. I turned toward Evelyn, who sat pale beside the fire. She lowered her eyes, voice quivering. Helen saw that same vehicle parked down the road, waiting. She said it watched this house before she was gone. The weight of the sky pressed down. I couldn't afford fear. I wouldn't wait for a knock. I knew exactly where I stood, between prey and predators. In the bedside drawer, beneath a stack of napkins, I found the small metal box Helen once told me to keep, for when you have no choice. I opened it, to find a compact pistol, cleaned and oiled, with a few loaded rounds. I was not a woman of violence, but I knew that self-defense is the last right of those whom truth endangers. My hand trembled as I lifted the gun, checked the chamber, then set it back carefully. Not to hunt, but to survive this night. I texted Cynthia again. Though I had already sent the folder, I needed confirmation that someone was truly watching. Cynthia, check Vance_truth now. If I vanish or don't respond within 24 hours, forward everything to the FBI. This isn't a plea, it's an order. I attached a snapshot of the license plate and the camera feed. Then I switched my phone to emergency mode, enabling live location sharing with a backup email Helen had once created for me. I didn't sleep. Instead, I moved through the cabin, setting up small cameras from Helen's old toolkit, aiming them toward the gate and the forest trail. Each glance out the window revealed the SUV's faint silhouette in the snow, a quiet reminder that they knew I was here. I stood on the porch, one hand clutching the gun in my coat pocket, whispering to myself, "Don't give them a moment of silence." Then I stepped back inside, locked both bolts, and braced for whatever came next. Because now, I wasn't just seeking justice for my mother. I was fighting to stay alive long enough to tell the truth. At dawn, pale silver light filtered through the curtains, signaling another dry, cold day in Jackson Hole. I had just made a cup of instant coffee when the phone on the table vibrated. The name on the screen froze my hand mid-air. Neve Brooks. A video call. I hesitated for a few seconds, then swiped to answer. Her image appeared, worn out, dark circles under her eyes, lips trembling like she'd been crying all night. Behind her was a luxurious room, light bouncing off an expensive suit jacket, but there was something different in her gaze. No confidence, only panic. "Mel," she rasped. "Please, stop. They know where you are. They'll do to you what they did to Catherine." I smirked, feeling the cold settle into every joint of my fingers. "And you, Nevaeh? You get to live comfortably, silent, on someone else's blood?" She shook her head, tears streaking down her face. "You don't understand. I didn't have a choice. I've lost everything. Moss, Jaden, they threatened me. They forced me to forge the reports. I thought I was saving the company, but Helen came to me. She said, if Melissa ever finds out, save her." I said nothing for a moment. Helen's voice echoed in my memory, gentle yet resolute. "A person may betray out of fear, but they can still make it right, if they fear the truth more." Nevaeh looked directly at the screen, her hand trembling as she held up what looked like a USB drive. "I can't hold this any longer," she said, voice breaking. "It contains the data Moss used to blackmail Jaden, all test logs and internal transactions for VTX-09. If they find out I sent it, I'm finished. But you need it more than I do." She leaned over her laptop, typing quickly. A notification flashed on my screen. "File received. For Mel when it's time.inc. I encrypted it with a personal password. When the time comes, you'll know how to open it." Neve inhaled deeply, wiped her tears, and looked at me one last time. I'm sorry for staying silent. I have no one left to trust. And Helen, she was right. You're the last chance the screen went black. I sat motionless, heart pounding in my chest. A part of me wanted to believe Navaya, that she regretted, that she was no longer standing with Jaden. But another part stayed cautious. Maybe she was just covering her tracks, or worse, luring me into a trap. I gasped for air, staring at the file now glowing on my screen. The title, For Mel When It's Time, flickering like a beacon. I didn't know when the time would come, but something in my gut told me that moment would mean life or death, not just for me, but for the truth my mother died to protect. I couldn't wait any longer. I opened the laptop and drafted a full summary of the case, organizing each piece of evidence. Helen's letter, the Catherine_accident_files, USB, the Moss recording, and the encrypted file Nevia had just sent. After cross-checking everything, I accessed the FBI Wyoming Field Office's contact portal and submitted the dossier to Agent Maria Torres, the name Helen once mentioned in another letter as the last person she trusted in the justice system. Less than an hour later, a reply arrived. Just a few lines. This is Agent Maria Torres. Materials received. However, if you want us to reopen the Catherine Vance case, we'll need original evidence. Contracts or video directly implicating Moss or Jaden. Without it, the case will be dismissed for lack of substantiating proof. I read it again and again, then looked up at the photo of my mother on the table, her eyes still gentle, but now urging. I knew what I had to do. Helen once told me in a note, if they wipe the records at Meridian, only the Cheyenne data vault holds the originals. That night, I drafted a plan, reckless in its simplicity. Infiltrate Meridian. I called Evelyn, the only person I could trust. She arrived within half an hour, bundled in a thick coat, holding a flashlight and keys to her old car. What are you planning, Melissa? She asked. I met her gaze, voice hoarse. To find the missing piece in my mother's death. Evelyn was silent for a long moment, then simply nodded. Then let's go. The two of us drove the old Ford pickup through snowy mountain roads toward the Cheyenne Industrial Park, home to Meridian's backup data center. On the way, I changed into one of Helen's old utility outfits. Gray technician's jacket, hard hat, and safety goggles. The passing streetlights flickered across the window, casting shadows over my reflection in the rearview mirror. Melissa Vance was gone. At the park's gate, I wore a fake maintenance contractor badge, while Evelyn kept the engine running. I stepped in, heart pounding, fingers gripping a bag, holding my laptop, and an external drive. In the hallway, the hum of servers filled the air like a beast's heartbeat. Following a map Helen once sketched in her notebook, I reached the digital archive room. A small plaque on the metal door read, Private Archive, Authorized Personnel Only. I plugged in a USB unlock tool I'd bought online and waited for the green light. When the door clicked open, I slipped in, heart racing. Among hundreds of labeled hard drives, I found a directory tagged Legacy Purchase Contracts. Scanning through, I stopped at the file. Purchase of Catherine V. I inserted my external drive and began copying. The file detailed how Moss and Jaden transferred Meridian shares to an anonymous fund just 2 weeks before my mother's death. It was the shadow contract, proof she was removed to finalize the deal. When the progress bar hit 95%, a piercing alarm shattered the silence. Red lights flashed across the room. I yanked the drive, shoved it into my coat, and ran. A shadow appeared at the end of the hall, a guard. I veered into a side corridor, pried open a vent, and crawled into the freezing air duct. Footsteps pounded behind me. I held my breath, crawling inch by inch through the narrow metal tunnel, heart racing, the cold biting into my skin. When I emerged outside, snow was still falling heavily. I tumbled down a grassy slope behind the building, mud and ice clinging to me, and dashed across a rusted fence. Evelyn saw me and flung open the car door. I jumped in, breath ragged, coat torn. Did you get it? She asked. I held up the drive, hand trembling. Yes, and it's going to change everything. In the distance, the blaring alarm echoed into the Cheyenne night, heralding the price they were about to pay for trying to bury the truth. The Ford tore through snow-covered roads, headlights slicing the whiteout night. I leaned back in the seat, struggling to catch my breath, heart still pounding from the escape. I had just risked everything to recover the last missing piece of my mother's death. The snow fell heavier, wind howling against the windshield, and within that wind, I swore I heard someone calling my name. Melissa! When the truck turned into a secluded parking lot behind the industrial park to rest, a figure appeared in the mist. Neva. She stood there, draped in a long gray coat, face pale, eyes hollow. Evelyn slammed the brakes in shock. I opened the door and stepped out, snow covering my shoulders. Neve? I called softly. She approached, shivering, her breath misting in the air. I don't have much time left, Mel. From her coat pocket, she pulled out a small USB and placed it in my hand. This will save you, and it's proof they can't deny. I stared at her, suspicion burning in my chest. Why help me? Neve smiled faintly, tears falling. Because Helen believed in you. And I owe her that. She turned and walked away, her silhouette fading into the snow, leaving me in the freezing night with a tiny piece of metal in my hand, the final fragment of truth. I returned to Helen's cabin and plugged the USB into my laptop. One file appeared, board_meeting_confidential.mp4. I hit play. The footage was blurry, but the audio was clear. In the frame was Meridian's boardroom, long table, harsh white light, and at the head, Jaden. He leaned back in his chair, voice low and firm. If Catherine doesn't stay quiet, Meridian collapses. We can't let one woman destroy this empire. Another voice, Moss, responded, I'll take care of it. It just has to look like an accident. A dry knock echoed on the table, then the video cut out. I sat frozen. The man I once trusted, the one I called my husband, now revealed as a cold monster in a black suit. I immediately sent the full data to Agent Maria Torres with a short message. Here is the original proof. Act before they erase everything. Less than 10 hours later, as the sun rose over the snowy mountains, the FBI stormed Meridian's headquarters. Live news broadcasts flooded the morning airwaves. BioVaties CEO Jaden Vance and Research Director Moss arrested for fraud and murder, CFO Nevaeh Brooks cooperating with investigators. I sat in Helen's living room, watching the screen show them being handcuffed and led away. In that moment, I didn't feel relief, only emptiness. 6 years of waiting, thousands of sleepless nights, all ending in a few seconds of cold footage. A few days later, I visited the Jackson Hole Cemetery, where my mother rested beside Aunt Helen. Snow fell thickly, the wind sharp, but the sky that day was strangely clear. I placed a bouquet of white tulips on the grave, my fingers trembling as they touched the frozen stone. I did it, Mom, I whispered, voice cracking. I kept my promise, not to fear the truth. A sudden gust of wind lifted the photo of my mother from the headstone, sending it swirling before landing softly in the snow. I bent to pick it up, and as I did, my eyes caught a faint inscription near the base of the stone, nearly hidden under the frost. The truth always finds light. I smiled, tears mingling with snow. Amid the biting cold, for the first time in years, I felt something real, something warm, not from a fireplace, but from within my own heart. The truth had awakened. 3 months later, I sat in the front row of the Federal Court of Wyoming, the room so cold that every breath turned to mist. Microphones lined the tables, national media cameras crowded the aisles. The entire country was watching the trial titled United States vs. BioVetis Corporation. On the witness stand, I told everything, every detail, every night, every piece of evidence I had uncovered in Helen's house. The FBI attorney played the confidential boardroom video, the USB recording of Moss discussing how to eliminate my mother, and the purchase of Catherine V's contract bearing Jaden Vance's signature. Each time a piece of evidence appeared, the courtroom buzzed with outrage. I looked down at my hands, still trembling, but not from fear this time. From the weight of justice I now carried, the justice my mother had died to protect. Across the room, Jaden sat between two agents, dressed in a gray suit, hair neatly combed but face gaunt. When our eyes met, he looked away. In his gaze, the arrogance was gone. Only emptiness remained. Nevea sat behind him, head bowed, tears falling onto her clasped hands. After 2 weeks of trial, the judge pronounced the verdict. His voice rang out firm and steady in the packed courtroom. Defendant Dr. Leonard Moss, Director of Research at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, is sentenced to 23 years in federal prison for voluntary manslaughter and financial fraud. Defendant Jaden Vance, CEO of Biovedis, is sentenced to 15 years in prison, with lifetime disqualification from asset management and business leadership. Defendant Neve Brooks, CFO of Meridian, is sentenced to 8 years, with sentence reduced for cooperating with investigators. The gavel struck with a sharp thud, an end to an era of lies. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let the tears fall. Not tears of grief, but of someone who had walked through hell and seen the light on the other side. As I stood to leave the courtroom, a reporter called out, "Ms. Vance, do you have anything to say about today's verdict?" I turned back, my voice calm. There are no winners in stories like this. Only the truth, and truth needs no one to speak for it. Outside the courthouse, the snow had melted, revealing patches of damp earth. In that moment, I received news from another court. Judge Cunningham, the one who had favored Jaden in our divorce, had resigned after being investigated for receiving gifts and donations from Biovedis. One part of the system had crumbled, and another had been cleansed. I looked up at the pale Wyoming sky, clouds retreating in the distance. Justice, not fast, not flashy, but inevitable. And for the first time in 6 years, I felt my mother could finally rest in peace. A few weeks after the trial, I received an official letter from the Meridian Compensation Fund, established after the company's dissolution. I sat for hours staring at the number printed on the page: $12 million. No amount could ever reclaim a childhood, honor, or a mother's life. But it was proof that truth had finally been measured in justice, not silence. I didn't spend it on myself. The next day, I drove back to Helen's cabin in Jackson Hole, where it all began. The snow had melted, the pines were green again, and the scent of sap filled the air. I walked into the house once covered in dust, now bright in the sunlight, and I knew what I had to do. I used the entire compensation to buy and restore the house into a small community center named Vance for Truth. I wanted it to be a refuge for people like my mother, those silenced for speaking up. The cabin kept its original structure, with new additions: a large window facing the mountains, a reading room, and workspace for volunteers. On the main wall, I hung a plaque engraved with my mother's words: "The truth always finds light." Evelyn Carter, the elderly neighbor who had helped me survive those dark days, became the center's honorary advisor. Each morning, she brought apple pie and sat telling young people about the courage of Helen and Catherine, two women who chose truth over safety. Every time I saw her smiling in the kitchen, I remembered that first snowy night when she gave me that old key ring. Agent Maria Torres also visited often. She was no longer just an officer of the law, but a friend. Sometimes we sat on the porch, looking out at the forest, talking about new cases and those still fighting to be believed. "You turned pain into power," Maria once said, her hand on my shoulder. "Helen and your mother would be proud." At night, when the porch light cast its glow on the snow, I stood quietly watching the house reborn, a place that once held secrets, now a haven of truth. In the stillness, I sometimes heard Helen's gentle laughter in the wind and knew I had brought them home, where they belonged, in the light. One early fall morning, just as the sun rose over the Tetons, I sat in the newly renovated room at the Vance for Truth Center, the space that used to be Helen's old library. On the desk were a small microphone, a laptop, and a steaming cup of chamomile tea. I opened the recorder, took a deep breath, and hit record. My own voice echoed softly in the still air, trembling but firm. "Welcome to Unmasked Truth," I said, "where we strip away the mask of fear and face what no one else dares to name." I recounted my journey, from the betrayed wife, the daughter left in darkness, to a woman who found light through evidence, justice, and courage. I shared how to detect financial manipulation, how to protect one's career, accounts, and trust. Not academic theories, but real stories, mistakes paid for in tears. The first episode ended with a quote I took from Helen's journal. Now a message I wanted to send to every woman listening. Fighting doesn't guarantee victory, but silence guarantees defeat. I expected nothing when I clicked upload, but within a week, my inbox flooded. The podcast hit over 1 million listens. Thousands of emails poured in from across the country. Women wrote that they had reviewed company accounts, spoken up against harassment, left toxic marriages. One letter made me cry all night. "Your story reminded me that truth isn't just a weapon, it's how we survive." I read every word, every thank you, like I was looking at small versions of myself. Women who were once afraid, forced into silence. I realized my journey didn't end at justice. That was only the beginning. Now, every time the mic turns on, I speak not just for my mother, not just for Helen, but for thousands still finding their voice. And whenever the wind passes through the windows of the Vance for Truth Center, I hear the familiar echo of the past. My mother's voice whispering, "You've found the light, Melissa." On a morning when the snow had finally melted, the sky above Jackson Hole was a rare, clear blue. I stood on the hill behind the Vance for Truth Center, where the entire valley stretched out beneath the early sun. The wind blew through my hair, carrying the scent of pine sap and the last chill of winter. The ground was soft and damp, the last patches of snow melting underfoot to reveal tender green grass. I breathed deeply, feeling the heaviness in my chest begin to dissolve into the breeze. In my hand was Helen's final letter, the corners frayed, the handwriting faded by time. I unfolded it and read the familiar blue ink I'd long since memorized. "Melissa, the truth will save you if you dare to face it." I smiled faintly, tears falling onto the page, blending with the ink. For 6 years, I had faced the truth, and it wasn't easy, wasn't beautiful, and certainly wasn't kind. But it had freed me. I had lost my home, my dignity, my faith in the man I once loved. But in return, I had found the most important thing, myself. I looked up, letting the sunlight reflect in my eyes. In the distance, birds soared over the mountains. I knew I was no longer the woman who trembled at Jaden's shadow at the airport, no longer someone who sought others' approval just to survive. I was Melissa Vance, the woman standing in the wind, carrying the legacy of 2 women who taught me that truth never dies. If you believe truth deserves to be heard, share this story. And don't forget to subscribe so together we can amplify the journeys of those who dare to face, live, and begin again.